Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 152 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on mental health. What is admissible in a court? So this is such a great, really brilliant podcast episode that actually intersects between clinical psychology and forensic psychology. So this is going to be such a really enjoyable episode for all of you, because if you've been watching the news lately, then you might have come across the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. Personally, I've not looked into it too much, but I know that different psychologists have actually been called to testify, including clinical, forensic, and their former marriage counsellor. And the reason why we actually need to look at this topic is that probably during their marriage sessions, they probably thought that everything that they were going to be talking about was completely confidential and under no circumstances could it be admissible to court. But that's not how it works. So that's why in today's really interesting episode we're actually going to focus on what is admissible, and most importantly, why is it. So this is just an episode that I just love, because I really do love when psychology and the law intersects. So moving on to psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, hallucinations are surprisingly common and varied experiences. Many mentally well people experience hallucinations. An estimate of 6 to 15% of us hear, see, feel, or even smell things that aren't real. But there has been little research into what those hallucinations are like, and how they might differ from those experienced by people with psychosis. Now, Masha L. M.J. Lindsay at Utrecht University and colleagues report the results of a large study of more than 10,000 people aged 14 to 88. The work, published in Schizophrenia, throws up a few surprises amongst a host of interesting findings. So I won't go into too much about the individual details of the report. But this is actually leading to quite an interesting shift in the research, because hallucinations, if you went back a few years ago, then the vast majority of people would have said that only the mentally unwell and all and all that really negative connotations would suffer from hallucinations. But now we're starting to realise that all of us also also suffer from hallucinations. Sometimes they're very infrequent. Sometimes people would just don't have them, but sometimes people do have them quite a lot. As mentioned, this research. And I know on the podcast before, we've also spoken about different hallucinations, and also how common they are. So interesting though, and it's a good that we're starting to move away from the negative side of hallucinations to the more sort of accepting the factor that other people do have them too, and it doesn't make them insane. And the second one is, job seekers prefer to work for more diverse companies. Diversity at work has become a bigger and bigger focus, and not just for employees. Employees are increasingly interested in the issue, with 69% of millennials and Gen Z-ers that's such a good word, saying that they are much more likely to work for an employer for more than 5 years if they have a diverse workforce. A new study finds that job seekers aren't even willing to explore jobs with lower salaries when their companies are more diverse. It finds that sharing information about diversity makes job postings more attractive to job seekers, even when the pay is lower. Oh no, that's really interesting, because I don't know, because a part of me would have thought that people would be opposite and of course it depends on your own political orientation and whatnot, because some people would not want to work for a diverse company whatsoever, but other people would. Personally, but also because I think one of the biggest problems with the working environment is that the vast majority of companies, they're so monolithic. They're just such the same though. But the But that is what it is actually quite nice about working in a very diverse company though, because you will get to meet different people with different experiences, and you can actually learn tons about different people and how they live. For example, I'm a student ambassador or with my university, and through that I get to meet different people, both from different nationalities, different socio-economic backgrounds, and they live in different parts of the country there. So that makes it more interesting to actually get into conversations with them. So yes, overall a very enlightening article. And the last one is: people prone to mind wandering are better at shifting between tasks. Letting your mind wander whilst you're meant to be working on a task doesn't sound like a particularly good idea. Indeed, psychologists have viewed mind wandering in this context as a failure, specifically a failure of executive control to maintain focus. Evidence that mind wandering worsens the performance on tasks that taps into working memory, for example, supports this idea. However, the full picture is not so neat. Though old adults generally have poor executive control than younger people, they tend to report less mind wandering, and some studies that require young adults to switch between various tasks have found that mind wandering makes a notable difference to their performance. So this is perplexing, said the author of a new paper in Consciousness and Cognition, at least in the context of the traditional theories. But Jingji Wan at University of Otago, New Zealand, and our colleagues reports findings that support an alternative idea, that people who have a tendency to mind wander enjoy greater cognitive flexibility. That is, they can shift more easily from one type of cognitive change to another. So whilst there's not a great amount that I can actually say about this particular psychology news article, well, I always think that it's really important to actually look wider than the more traditional methods, and kind of considering how old some of these traditional theories are. Yeah, they definitely need updating though. So I hope you enjoyed the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So about this week, I've been doing a number of different business pieces. Some of them psychology focused, some of them just not in the slightest. But in terms of psychology, I've been continuing more with my psychology placement, but not enough to actually comment on it and actually go into any depth about it. But the interesting thing that I do want to talk to you about is that I at least want to mention what I'm at my final year project, which I'll be starting in September. In the short, though, is an EEG study that actually focuses on the alpha waves in the brain, because alpha waves is actually to do with cognition and actually effort and concentration. That was I had to find the correct words there. Yeah, because of course cognition actually encompasses all of our mental processes. Again, but alpha waves, yes, the more alpha waves that a person has when it comes to their brain waves, yes, but the more concentrating that they actually are. So, but that is a really good way, to measure learning, concentration, etc. Though, so using EEG, what we hope to achieve next year is that whilst they're doing a particular task, we'll be able to measure their brain waves and actually see which regions of the brain are involved in effort and concentration. So I think that that's really interesting, because EEGs, they are one of the more, I don't know how to put this, I would say they're definitely one of the more temperamental, because the problem is that you need to make sure, as a participant, you don't blink, you don't clench your teeth, you don't move your head, etc., because otherwise it really does make the data quite muddled. Yeah, but muddled though. So definitely a bit problematic though. But I am really looking forward to using EEGs. Yeah, the only thing that I need to make sure that I don't do is that I don't accidentally stab anyone in the head using blunt needles that you inject the electrolyte gel with, because someone actually did that to me once. I was not impressed, because even though those things are blunt, if someone jabs you with enough force, they can definitely hurt. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment on the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you, because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Forensic Psychology, which is such a brilliant sponsor for today's episode, because in today's episode we're mainly going to be looking at course and the whole legal side of psychology, which forensic psychology actually focuses on. So this absolutely brilliant book, which is really engaging, really easy to understand, and it has such a conversational tone, which is so much better than the dull, boring textbooks that we all know and love. Not. It actually has an entire section on course, on course and how forensic psychologists have actually those in the whole courtroom process. In addition to actually going on to the much larger bits. For example, the theories of imprisonment, the theories of offending, sex offending, etc. This is such a great book that really does go into so much depth about forensic psychology. So I cannot recommend this book enough. So there is a forensic psychology available from all major ebook and audiobook retailers, and you can get the paper and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. So that's enough for the personal update, so let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode, so we're going to be talking about mental health. What is admissible? So this is just such a brilliant podcast episode that I'm actually quite surprised that it's taken me this long to actually cover something like this, because this is just so critical in my opinion to the whole legal process. So let's dive into it. Present and past mental states. Whilst I haven't been following the Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp trial, because it seriously does not interest me, I am aware that there has been a lot of therapists and forensic psychologists testifying about the mental health state of both of them, and this is where our first area comes in. Since in court proceedings, a person's current and past mental state can be called into question and asked to be examined. This includes, but really is not limited to, but does the client have any history of mental health conditions or addiction? As well as all of this includes information that was provided to the therapist under confidentiality. In addition, in order for a court to properly understand the domestic situation, a marriage counsellor, for example, might be called in to give evidence and explain what both parties, or just one, if that's all that they have helped, told them about the living situation and the events. Also, a therapist would have to turn over most private communications, diagnoses, and other sensitive information to the spouse's counsel and/or the court, as well as either party in the proceedings may call the therapist to stand to testify as an expert witness on the client's or their opponent's mental and emotional state. For example, if we look at the current trial that's going on in the trial, where Dr. Anderson, who was served as the couple's marriage counsellor, gave the court a sworn testimony and that there was a mutual abuse between the couple, as well as Dr. Curry testified that Amber Heard was given a diagnosis of a borderline personality disorder, something that Amber Heard's psychologist doesn't agree with, and testifies that she studies from post-traumatic stress disorder due to the trauma from Johnny Depp. However, what we're actually interested in is that these conversations that the couple were probably believed were personal and private are now in the public domain for lots of people to read, something that could actually be very, very scary for different people for different reasons. But the problem with this example is the couple is very popular, famous, and very, very high profiled. So what is admissible in their court for normal people? Well, it turns out that question is actually very flawed, because a lot of personal information that you would never imagine would actually come to light because of confidentiality does end up coming out in a court. Regardless of how high profile you are, due to it is very common for people involved in court proceedings to have a history of mental health challenges, regardless of whether it is both or just one of the parties involved, or these people have been known to see a therapist or a counsellor. Therefore, because they have a mental health record, that needs to be submitted into evidence, as well as it is fairly common to have expert testimony given by mental health professionals. And you never know, but one of you might be asked to give expert witness testimony one day. Personally, I think that would actually be great, and personally, I would actually quite like to give that at some point in the far, far future. Furthermore, when it comes to child custody cases, the parents in this situation tend to waive their right to confidentiality due to in custody cases, the court must decide what is in the best interest of the child, which means that the need for transparency is extremely important, as the court must understand if one or both of the parents has health or mental health difficulties. As a result, to better understand the entire situation, a court may order a therapist to turn over the patient's most private diagnoses, communications, and other sensitive information to the court and opposing counsel. Also, while on the topic of the custody battles, if both parents undergo a mental health evaluation, then the therapist will most probably have to turn over all of their notes, medical records, amongst other things as well. Then, in some instances, the courts have ordered an in-camera review of several years of a person's mental health records, with this being a legal parlance from a process in which a judge privately looks at confidential, private, or sensitive information to determine which material is relevant and should be shared with the opposing counsel. Personally, I'm actually really glad that there is a legal mechanism that helps to protect people with mental health conditions, because you obviously don't want every little detail about your history to be turned over to the opposing counsel if it isn't relevant. So it is important that there is a type of protection to prevent this overgiving, if you will. For example, there was one such case where a mother's medical records showed that she had been hospitalised 15 times over the span of 10 years because of her mental health conditions, resulting in the court deciding that she would be unable to give the child proper and adequate care. How do people prepare for court? Of course, nothing on this podcast is ever any sort of official advice, but it's interesting to look at the type of things that people, including us psychologists, do to prepare for these court proceedings. For instance, mental health professionals must prepare themselves from handing over all of their notes and files that are relevant to the client in question, if they are ordered by the court to do so. Additionally, if a parent has been asked to provide this information, then it is absolutely imperative that they ensure that their legal team is told everything and all of the issues that will be revealed, so the legal teams can prepare themselves, their questions, and any way to possibly get the information thrown out. Conclusion. However, I do want to finish up by saying something that will remind us all about the true emotion of this time. Whatever step of the process we are involved in, whether we are the psychologists involved or the actual people in the court proceedings, this is a very stressful time for everyone. So please, look after your mental health during this extremely stressful time. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that you learned something and got something out of it. Personally, I think that when psychology interacts with the law, then I think that is just such an interesting topic there, right? Because it really does emphasise the important role that psychology has to play in justice and the legal system. So this really does help forensic psychology establish itself. And this is definitely an area that I hope to do future podcast episodes on. So if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help us spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out Forensic Psychology, available in all the usual places, and it's available in audiobook format. But if you didn't want to buy a book, be so willing to give the podcast a bit of one-time support, then please check out buymeacoffee.com at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.